afternoon. My name is Jacqueline and Gary. I am the Chief of the Acquisitions and Assistance Branch here in Region 3, and I'm happy to be kicking off this session. We can go to the next slide. This morning, some of you may have attended the Show Me the Money session, how to find, apply for, and manage federal grants. So this afternoon, we're coming full circle. And in this session, you'll hear from 4 of our partners who have successfully applied for and received EPA grants. So we wanted to highlight a variety of our competitive programs. So you'll be hearing about the Brownfields Grant Program, which provides grants and technical assistance to assess, safely clean up, and sustainably reuse contaminated properties. Our G3 grants program, which supports plans that reduce stormwater runoff, increase the number and amount of green spaces in urban areas, and improves the health of local streams in the Chesapeake Bay. Our environmental justice small grant program supports and empowers communities working on solutions to local environmental and health issues. The program is designed to help communities understand and address exposures to multiple environmental harms and risks. And our our environmental education grant program, which supports environmental education projects that promote environmental awareness and stewardship and help provide people with the skills to take responsible actions to protect the environment. So to kick off our session today, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Hughes. She's the Director of Communications for the Earth Conservancy. Thank you so much. Enjoy the session.
Thank you. Okay, so before I start to talk about Earth Conservancy and the work we've accomplished with the EPA over the past 2 decades, I'm going to be giving a short history lesson. So next slide. Earth Conservancy's brownfields are mine-scarred land, so that's probably not what you usually think about when you think of a brownfield site. On this map of Pennsylvania, you'll see the 4 shaded areas of blue on the right-hand side. Those are the anthracite coal fields, and those, it's actually the largest deposit of anthracite coal in the world. So coal was discovered there in 1790. It started being distributed in the early 1800s, and then because of the Industrial Revolution, because of the power of anthracite coal, it burns cleaner and longer and hotter than bituminous and other forms of coal. It became really critical during the Industrial Revolution. So by the 1920s, over 100 million tons of coal were being mined from the area for sale up and down the East Coast. Next. This would have been a common site throughout the coal region, so across those 4 fields. This is a colliery, and it's basically a very large complex of all the buildings and accoutrements that go along with processing coal. So coal would have come up from a nearby shaft, gone up that tramway on the right-hand side, and then that's a breaker. And so the coal would go down through the breaker, be crushed and cleaned and sorted by size, and then be distributed. But you also see there's a power plant on that site. There's water tankers, there's waste areas. Whoops, go back. There's waste areas and there's railroad infrastructure. Oh, this is my old presentation. Go to the next slide. So with that prevalence, as you can imagine, I think it's in the next slide with this presentation, the coal industry kind of drove the local economy, and it supported many secondary industries like the railroads, like the textile and garment industry. These are some images from a special payday that was held at the Blue Coal offices. Blue Coal was one of the major companies in our region, and they spray painted their coal, as you can see in the middle, to kind of differentiate it from their competitors. Next slide. And this is what I was talking about with the prevalence of those colliery systems. So this is about a 12-mile stretch along the Susquehanna River. And everywhere you see a dot on that map is where there would have been one of those colliery complexes. So really every 1 to 2 miles, there would be at least one breaker along the area. Next slide. So what happened in 1959 is that a company was mining out, decided illegally to mine out underneath the Susquehanna River, which you see there. And the river crashed through the bed, and it flooded the mines immediately in the entire region. So that pretty much shut down coal mining locally. Some companies did do continued strip mining of the area, which is what you see there on that site. But really, coal mining never recovered as a major part of the local economy. And unfortunately, because there were no regulations, sites were able to be left just like that, unremediated. So we have culm banks, which you see there. They're hundreds of acres. And then you have, see that orange pond, that's acid mine drainage. So that's contaminated water as well from the mines. Next slide. As you can imagine, the environment wasn't the only thing that was affected at this time. So as you see on that table, some of our communities lost over half the population. I read one estimate where about 170,000 jobs were lost in the coal industry alone. And our economic indicators have never recovered since then. We usually lag behind not only the county in our area, but also the state and the nation. Next slide. So this is an image of what we've been left with. Next slide. This is another site. This is 180 acres. And this is an image. Okay, next slide. And this is an image, if you go back to that that map of 12 miles that I showed you, this is what it looks like in real life. So you just have culm banks, all those sites that you see on that map that are marked with the black tag. Those were Earth Conservancy's properties that had major impairments. Next slide. So Earth Conservancy was founded in 1992 by a group of community leaders who were concerned about the land of the Blue Coal Corporation and what was going to happen to it, because it had declared bankruptcy and they ended up trying to sell the land off piecemeal. So the group from Earth Conservancy got together and they decided to purchase the land wholesale. So that was 16,500 acres. And from that point of the purchase in 1994, we've worked to put it back into smart productive reuse. One of the major parts of that, and it's the first box that you see there, was land use planning. And I can't emphasize enough how much that project, which we did in 1995-96, was to our current success. We had a group of 38 members on a steering committee that was municipal officials, local elected officials, agencies, heads of the universities, community members. They got together and over the course of the year prioritized what the land would be used for, or what would be reclaimed first, and then what the land would be used for. Next. So this is just a blow up of that land use plan. Next. So mine-scarred land wasn't added to the definition, the federal definition of brownfields, until 2002. So our first brownfields cleanup grant we received in 2003, and it was for the silt pond. So basically it was just a pond holding a lot of silt and sediment from the processing of coal. And we reclaimed it for green space. It's still green like this today. So that was our first cleanup grant. Next slide. The next one we had done a project with the EPA early on to create 2 acid mine drainage treatment systems. The one pilot, well, both worked, but the one pilot we wanted to expand because it was working so well. So now that we were in the era of brownfields cleanup grants, we received a second grant for the expansion of it. And now this treats 100% of the iron loadings that are coming into the pond. Next. The land use plan designated a need for housing. So this was a 15-acre culm bank, and you can see it's right next to residential areas. We reclaimed that again through a brownfields cleanup grant. And now there's 42 townhomes being developed on the site. Next. Industry, obviously, from the statistics I showed you, was very important. And these sites are very large, so they become very appealing for developers. So EPA, this site, our Hanover 9 site, it was 390 acres. With the EPA's assistance through multiple phases and over multiple years, we reclaimed this site. We reclaimed 150 acres. There are 2 logistics centers operating it now. The larger one you see there is 1.4 million square feet, and True Values operating out of there. Next slide. And this is what we're working on currently. This is our Bliss Bank site. It's 200 acres, and you can really see from this aerial view the natural topography of the site. Next slide. This is what it looks like on site. Nothing can grow on this land because of the acidity of the spoils, as well as the blackness of it. The darkness retains the heat, so it has elevated temperatures. Next slide. So this is, again, we did this in phases. We did this with multiple grants, brownfield cleanup grants from the EPA. This is what the site looked with 2 phases complete and the 3rd site underway of being reclaimed. Next slide. This is what it looks like with all 3 pieces reclaimed. We sold it as a 130-acre parcel to a developer. Next slide. And this is what it looks like today. So there's 3 businesses operating on that site now. Next slide. And I wanted to show with the Bliss Bank site, and this is like many of our properties, reclamation's about more than one thing. So on this site up above on the hill, there is a stream, and it actually gets diverted underground into the mines. And so we wanted to bring it up above ground. And the mine scarred land includes waterways in the definition. So with EPA support, I believe we got 4 grants from the Brownfields Cleanup Program. We constructed about 1 mile of stream channel. So we made that connection in December of 2022. Next slide. And this shows where Bliss Bank is. And again, then thinking of that map, we're just continuing eastward. So Bliss is on the left. We're continuing eastward now to the Truesdale Bank. Similar problems, larger site, and we have 2 streams that are impaired on it. Next slide. And if you want to just hit the video. Is it going? There we go. So this is when SB Run was actually connected. So for 70+ years, that stream had not been running down that bank. So it was really amazing, even though it was freezing in December, to be out there and hear the babbling of the brook along the stream channels. But we're really proud of all our accomplishments, and it is undisputable that we would not have been able to do this without the EPA and the Brownfields Cleanup Program. We've received nearly $3.9 million through it. And I have to give the EPA credit because oftentimes they're the first one in for a project, and then that allows us to leverage it for other funding sources. So with that, thanks to the EPA, and thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. This is really exciting and very personal to me because the chain of grants I'm about to talk about actually pretty much details my entire career here at the Clean Air Council. If we want to get the slideshow started. Okay, great. So right before I came on in August of 2012, in 2011, Clean Air Council had applied for an EPA EJ small grant to look at air quality and what's called the River Wards of Philadelphia, which is a combination of a few neighborhoods, Kensington, Port Richmond, Bridesburg, in what was formerly dubbed the Workshop of the World, where so much of Philadelphia's heavy industry was located. And particularly interesting is that the grant was written to look at the impacts of the port. You can see in this graphic that there was a large port down there. But you'll hear later that the results were a bit more variable than that. And one of the real benefits, this $30,000 project mostly paid for a lot of meetings and stationery and food and things like that. This and the trolley tour that I'll talk about in a second. But the air quality monitoring that was included here was actually offered at no cost by Drexel University, who you'll hear later was a frequent partner on this effort. If you want to move on. So I just like including this flyer. I'm a community outreach person. All these things matter. I thought this was a really good flyer, and this was the route that was shown in the previous slide was the environment tour. That was the route that we took using funds from EPA. My colleagues rented a trolley that housed about 10 or 15 people. There's a YouTube video of me talking about the coal legacy of the area. from that trolley that was housing a very high-tech particulate matter monitor from Drexel University. And I mentioned earlier about the concerns identified during this project varied slightly than the assumptions about the port. The three main concerns identified in the project were truck traffic in the area, dust pollution from legacy industrial sites, and then active scrapyards in the area, if you want to move on. So at the conclusion of that small grant, and beginning this partnership with Drexel University, I was able to immediately plug in to a survey project funded by the National Science Foundation, led by Drexel University, that had the exact same geographic focus. Again, we were looking at environmental hazards in the river wards, and this expansion really began. As mentioned earlier, a $30,000 grant buys you some staff time and a few meetings and food and maybe a bus trip. We then took those concerns and what we heard during those meetings, and did an incredibly ambitious door knocking project. From the information gathered from the previous grant, we wrote an incredibly detailed at the door public health survey that could take anywhere from 20 minutes to over an hour, which is fairly unheard of. And with a really excellent team, we knocked on over 3,000 doors, and I personally managed that survey team and did many of the surveys myself. So after those two projects, which included just lots and lots of listening, we were able to really take action and quickly applied for a 2-year air monitoring grant from the Aetna Foundation, where we were really going to put all this information into action. And remember this scrapyard, because it's going to come up later, and you'll see, even just this one picture captures multiple air pollution issues, the truck traffic kicking up all the dust, the legacy contaminated dust. The scrapyard used to be a coal pile 100 years ago. And again, the actual air pollution that comes from the scrapyard. So thankfully, we received that air monitoring grant, and you can move on, and started hosting workshops. That was I believe that was a maybe $250,000 to do 8 workshops over 2 years and install monitors in the Kensington and Port Richmond community. And again, one of the amazing synergies of this project is that EPA itself took the results of our small grant and recognized, this very obvious concern of lead contamination in people's blood and soils. So, fast forward to 2017, during one of our air monitoring meetings funded by the Aetna Foundation, we were able to host EPA, where they conducted soil and blood lead testing on site. This was another exciting victory. When we applied for the EPA EJ Small Grant in 2011, it was written into that project that we were going to impact local planning considerations. It took a few more years than we thought it would, but eventually the Philadelphia City Planning Commission spoke to myself, the community groups that we were working with, academics at Drexel University, specifically Dr. Ali Kenner, and we were all able to contribute to this really detailed planning assessment. And I can send the presentation around later, but we really made an impact, and this is a very interesting report to read. The city of Philadelphia sort of looking at itself and looking at some institutional problems, and what do we do with these facilities that can be very sustainable because they are truly recycling facilities, and they can also be very dangerous as they sometimes burst into flames. And to really illustrate how important this air monitoring grant was, we already knew this is the same facility that was in the picture a few slides earlier. That's why I mentioned it. So we were already aware of problems with this facility. We were already aware of its significant code violations. And we placed an air monitor at a concerned resident's home directly across the street. And right in the middle of our grant period, this facility exploded into one of the most significant industrial fires ever seen in the city of Philadelphia. And it really sort of changed the way the city reacted. You know, we were very, very prepared to react to this fire with lots of different information. And since then, unfortunately, there still continues to be industrial fires in the city of Philadelphia for a variety of reasons. But the city's reaction, the media's reaction has all been very different. And just to plug another, partnership we got from this was put together by John Lee, who at the time was a medical intern at Thomas Jefferson, who then took his residency in Delaware with the Nemours Christiana Care Medical Consortium, who was then able to give us another air monitoring grant for the state of Delaware. And we actually still have some of those monitors if you know anyone interested in the state of Delaware. So yes, we had lots of support to analyze the air quality data that we were getting from analyzing this fire. Yes, please play. I'm glad this is working because this is a startling video. This is not taken by me. This is taken by a concerned resident. And if the volume was on, you would be able to hear the cutting that's happening in this. This is not an industrial fire. You don't have to worry about the volume. We can all look at it later. It's much more. Okay, there you go. Yes, this is unfortunately still a lot of what it's like to live in the Kensington area of North Philadelphia. This is an old warehouse, and really, if you could just keep it playing until the recorder pans to her home, just to show you how close this is to her front door. Here she is analyzing some of the existing conditions. Yeah, there we go. That's her house right there. So these are the kinds of air quality complaints that we're helping people make to the city of Philadelphia. And you can move on to the next slide. I don't want to take up too much time. So yeah, it's startling stuff. So again, I'll just keep talking about the long-lasting impact this project has had. There is a date on this article, May 2023. Once I started doing this work, trying to identify local air pollution issues in Kensington around auto-related facilities, I was eventually brought to Southwest Philadelphia, which has very similar problems. And 7-8 years later, the amazing Public Interest Law Center in Philadelphia has helped residents file a nuisance lawsuit against some auto shops that have truly been damaging public health in their communities. And again, this is a lawsuit 7 or 8 years in the making. And then another incredibly recent thing, myself and Clean Air Council have not wavered in our enthusiasm for air monitoring, and neither has EPA. So we were very recently, very generously granted this opportunity to do air monitoring and community organizing in Southwest Philadelphia, Chester, Pennsylvania, that was mentioned earlier, looking at this whole, basically from the former Philadelphia refinery to the Marcus Hook liquefied natural gas or natural gas liquid export facility. There's a prospective liquefied natural gas facility down there. So we're going to be doing some air monitoring on that whole, what we refer to as the I-95 industrial corridor in southeastern Pennsylvania. So again, this is a current, if you go to purpleair.com/map, you will still see particulate matter monitors. And again, if you were looking at this before we started these projects, you wouldn't really see anything on this map. And lots of people have seen the work we've done. I've installed several of these monitors personally, and others have sort of taken up the flag. So just to really reinforce, these are efforts that were started in 2011, if you want to keep moving. So again, and it's even taken us out of the Philadelphia area. Another one of the big projects I work on is supporting and strengthening the EPA's upcoming regulations for methane pollution from oil and gas sites. Southwestern PA, that's really the big issue. It's not scrapyards in Philly, it's the gas industry. And because of the super emitter response program and the methane emissions reduction program, there are two fantastic EPA programs coming up. We're really going to empower communities to engage with whatever local infrastructure they're trying to deal with. And again, this is my personal Philly 311 page. To this day, I help people make public health complaints, any sort of environmental issues that you might be experiencing. We try to find the right agency to connect with, whether in Philly, across Pennsylvania. And I think that's it. If you want to move on to the next slide, there's some further reading that we have in my email. There's lots of things that we didn't include in this proposal or in this presentation. And there's some really cool academic articles that myself and some of my peers have written about these issues and more. So please reach out.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk with you all about the Green Streets, Green Jobs, Green Towns grant program. We can go on to the next slide. Before we dive in about the grant program, I just want to provide some details about the Chesapeake Bay Trust and who we are in case there's anyone who is not familiar with us. We are a nonprofit organization that empowers community-based groups with resources to improve natural resources in their communities. We focus within the Chesapeake Bay watershed region. We work with many funding partners to collaboratively support natural resource projects in several key topic areas, which include education, restoration, community engagement, science and innovation, and capacity building. As a whole, we award over $12 million in grants and projects each year. Next slide. The grant program I'll be talking to you all about today is the Green Streets, Green Jobs, Green Towns G3 grant program. This is a partnership between EPA Region 3, West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, the Chesapeake Bay Program, as well as the Chesapeake Bay Trust. And the overall goal for this grant program is to help communities develop and implement plans that reduce stormwater runoff, increase the amount of urban green spaces, improve the health of our environment, and overall enhance quality of life and community livability. This program can fund projects within the Chesapeake Bay watershed region of EPA Region 3. If we go back to the previous slide, please. This includes Maryland and portions of Delaware, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and West Virginia. And for this program, eligible applicants include local governments, nonprofit organizations, as well as neighborhood and community associations. For this program, we can fund a variety of green infrastructure related projects. So really helping communities get started with this work and with these efforts. So we can fund anywhere from the beginning stages of developing conceptual plans and then taking that to the next phase of engineer designs and then following through with implementation and construction of the projects for larger scale Green Street infrastructure projects. And then we can also support smaller scale community greening projects such as tree plantings and community gardens. We also have a white paper and tools project track within this grant program as well to really conduct research and develop tools that help promote green infrastructure in these communities and make it more accessible. And then finally, we do have a charrette and technical planning assistance track for applicants who are not sure how to get started and need some assistance in this work as well. And in a few slides, I'll have some project examples to share with you all. This slide here shows a quick snapshot of the program from fiscal year 2011 to 2022. To date, we have awarded 245 projects, totaling $14 million in awards. And with these projects comes $25 million in matching leverage funds for a total impact of $39 million. On the bottom left of this slide are just a few metrics to kind of see the overall impact of the installations that have occurred in this program. And then on the right side, we have a breakdown of the various project types we've supported, as well as the distribution of funding that has gone to each of the states within the eligible project areas. The 2023 grant cycle just concluded back in March of this year. And so just to summarize what we have received, we got in 69 applications this year, which is more than double what we received in the previous round. The total request amount is $4.6 million. And the total amount available for funding is $1.9 million. The funding decisions have not been announced yet, but will be at a press event in June next month. So we are super excited to be able to support these awardees. We have 36 applications that are being recommended for approval, and 58% of these are for projects within environmental justice communities. This first project that I'll be highlighting is the Salvation Army in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They received 2 awards, one for engineer designs and one for construction of 2 rain gardens totaling 6,000 square feet. And these rain gardens capture runoff from their parking lot as well as from the main road just outside of their building. And what is interesting about this project, aside from the stormwater and water quality benefits, the Salvation Army really uses this as an educational tool and a community engagement tool. They have several groups of volunteers that often come out to their site, and they'll use this as part of their maintenance days and volunteer days, and teach community members about these practices and their function and their purpose. The second project is from the town of Bath, also known as Berkeley Springs in West Virginia. They also received 2 awards, both for construction, to remove pavement and replace the area with permeable pavement and silva cell systems containing native plants and trees along Washington Street. This street is home to many businesses, and prior to the installation of these projects, these businesses often experience standing water in front of their storefronts and flooding during certain rain events. And so now that these installations have been put into the ground, they've have no longer experienced these water issues, and the storefronts have been enhanced with these green features and are more welcoming and inviting to their customers. This next project is the Glenmont Forest Green Streets project from Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection in Wheaton, Maryland. This particular project is one piece of a larger effort where they installed over 50 stormwater facilities in the Glenmont Forest community. This community was built in the 1940s and 50s and did not have any stormwater management and very few green features in the community as well. And so interestingly about this project is that the county DEP partnered with a local watershed group, Rock Creek Conservancy, to conduct outreach and engagement throughout the project to really gain input from the community members, since these installations would occur right in front of their homes and in their community. And so far the feedback has been very positive, and community members have noticed major reductions in stormwater runoff in their yards. This last project I'll highlight is a white paper developed by Nature Sacred. For this paper, they examined the cost savings that health facilities can have by investing in green spaces. And along with this paper, they did develop a calculator tool that health facilities can use as well to determine these cost savings. And this is one of the first, if not the first, calculator tool that has been developed with this purpose in mind. And even in this last round of the grant program, we have seen applicants really use this to educate and promote these types of practices with their leadership and with their communities to really showcase the benefits of green infrastructure. We do have more projects, examples from the Green Streets Grant Program on our website. The Chesapeake Bay Trust does have an awarded projects map that displays all of the projects that we have awarded in this program. And we also have additional project highlights and fact sheets on our Green Streets Grant Program webpage as well. So looking ahead, we recognize that it's going to take all of us to make progress and in this work and improve the environment for all of us. And so these are just a few strategies that we continue to pursue to expand this grant program and reach communities and reach more communities and engage more communities. So first being using the EPA's EJ Screen tool to prioritize our outreach, determine which communities are most impacted by climate change and environmental challenges, and focusing in on those areas. Secondly, continuing to provide technical assistance to applicants. We recognize that for some applicants, it may be difficult to know how to apply for a grant and how to navigate this process. And so we do offer technical assistance to provide that support and provide that guidance to them. Third, increasing engagement and participation from communities in specifically Delaware, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. We really want to increase our collaboration with these communities in these specific states and get them on board and participating in this grant program. And then fourth, continuing to build relationships and engage with new funding partners so that we can leverage more funds and increase our impact. This program has been in place since 2011. And so we've worked in partnership with EPA to, bring in new partners and really increase our impact and bring in more funding sources. And then finally, continuing to engage subject matter experts in our application review process. We want to ensure that these applications are vetted by experts who are up to date on the current science and the current practices. So that way the funds that support this program can be implemented in the best way. And then this is just thank you all so much for your time today. My contact information is here if anyone wants to reach out. I'm always happy to talk more about this grant program and looking forward to collaborating. Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk about our grant work with the EPA. Again, my name is Jerome Shabazz. I'm the founder and executive director of Jazz Tech Development Services, Inc. Wonderful title. Actually is an acronym for Juveniles Active in Science and Technology. And I'm also the executive director of the Overbrook Environmental Education Center. Just to tell you a little bit about our organization, we are a hyper-local nonprofit organization. We started 25 years ago, and since our founding in 1997, we sort of had a very clear mission as to what our benefit would be to the community, and that was to promote environmental and climate justice, to use environmental resources as a means to improve public health, and to establish green career options, as well as sponsor programs that protect, conserve the built and natural environments where our constituents live, work, and play. We're in an urban environment, and it's a very interesting kind of construct in terms of protecting and educating fence line communities about the risk of hazards and threats to their health and community by way of environmental impacts. So in 2002, Jazz Tech applied and received very early on technical support from the EPA to help us establish the Overbrook Environmental Education Center. And now the center is this sort of neighborhood-based local institution that's committed to removing barriers to public access of information, and it helps to advance the quality of life of the residents who live around the center. Our work is guided by 3 areas of service. One is environmental stewardship, non-formal environmental education, and the removal of derogatory impacts on community health. And so our projects, we began with looking at the intersectional work as an environmental justice community, the intersectional work that connects the the community, to the environment, and public health. And so, next slide, please. And so our mission is to materialize the public outreach of education around, you can go back, a public education. Could you go back, please? No, the next slide. Right. And so one of the first projects that we'll talk about, we keep skipping that. I wanted to see the lot where we began through a Brownsville's EPA Brownsville's cleanup grant. And this Brownsville's cleanup grant is adjacent to a fence line community where roughly 85 families are adjacent to this former vehicle storage lot and construction facility. Next slide, please. The objective of our work was threefold. To identify the particular risks through our Brownsville's funding, to do cleanup, the cleanup and assessment work that would enable us to repurpose the site. But what was important in our process was our ability to co-manage outputs that the community was actively involved with. And so the idea for our work was sort of informed by community interests. It was a community-informed approach. We had charrettes and the thinking around how this community space could be repurposed, how it can utilize infrastructural benefits that can resolve and mitigate some of the existing conditions that were in this particular community. And as such, it enabled the community to see our improvements not only as a development project, but a community enhancement project. Next slide, please. So if you can look in the background of this project, one of the things that's important to emphasize is that all of this decay and hazard relative to the stressors of vehicles and the contaminations that were emitted into the soil, air quality matters were happening right in the backyard of the neighbors. The only thing that separated them from the hazard was their fence. And we know, we call those fence line communities, because the fence is just more of a metaphor as opposed to a real barrier protecting people from any of the respective harm. And so what was interesting for us as an environmental justice organization was not just the benefit of our ability to plan and to provide the structural benefit for cleanup, but it was this elegant basis by which we can engage the community around restoring values back to the community life, and to allow people to reimagine what a community would be like. Now, these infrastructures were in place principally because of zoning and that birthed out of redlining, and that we had these sort of inappropriate associations of industrialized use right in the backyard of residential property. Next slide, please. In addition to the construction site, the facility itself is a very small scale. It's 2 acres, but it impacts a great deal of how people perceive their communities, how they function within their communities, and their expectation for healthy and vibrant community life. This building that we're looking at now was actually one of the anchor facilities. It was a former supermarket. In this respective community that's in Philadelphia, PA, in the 1980s, it was part of a broader planning scheme to relocate these smaller scale supermarkets to malls where they can anchor the malls, expand their footprint, allow them to have additional access to parking and residual business that came by way of people transgressing from other establishments. And what it did was it allowed for this trend of removal of food establishments. And hence we see a lot of what we call now the food deserts because of the migration of those facilities. The unintended consequence in many cases that we were able to discover was that the quality of the facility itself was essentially a hazard. The transformers for the building was interior to the space. The refrigeration was interior to the space. All of the HVAC, where we would probably have put those infrastructural components outside of the building, was interior to the building, which created a tremendous amount of risk to the community. There were PCBs inside of these transformers and VOCs, all other kinds of potential hazards that we were able to assess and remove off of that site. Next slide. And so we systematically deconstruct the site and in our effort to communicate a value structure that would be of greater benefit to the community. This is a before and after shot of showing the southern rear of the facility where it was a lot of decay and it was hard to manage the stormwater runoff. We were able to install a bioretention system and on the higher elevations, there's a wonderful playful learning space that children engage in currently. Next slide. Our first, entry into this work, we began as educators embedded in Overbrook High School at 59th and Lancaster in Philadelphia. And what's so unique about Lancaster, the Overbrook High School, is that, some famous alumni were there, like, Wilt Chamberlain, and people know about Will Smith and even astronaut guy Bluford. And when we were working with many of the students from Overbrook High in the early 2000s, they always pointed out to us, the contradiction of what we talked about in class about conserving our built-in natural environments, and they would always point out the level of decay and potential environmental risk, not only to the physical, the chemical stressors on the community, but the emotional and social determinants that would also emerge as a result of that. And they were very clear about those cumulative impacts of how these derogatory spaces were affecting their physical, emotional, behavioral health. And what our project was able to do is to not only remove the hazards, but to reimagine a greener and safer space. And you can see on the left just the beauty of being able to take away a lot of that hazardous material. Next slide, please.
Jerome, just to let you know, only 10 minutes remains in the session.
Thank you very much. And so again, we were able to repurpose the lot structure and put an elevated greenhouse, bump outs, pollinator gardens, and other green spaces that will allow for edible landscapes. On the site, we in addition to our edible landscapes, we have permeable paving that has drainage zones. We collect about 30,000 gallons in bioretention and a bioretention system through a swell, flow through planters, pervious paving, pervious asphalt, and other green amenities for the ability to help reduce combined sewer overflow for the neighborhoods by way of sequestering stormwater on site. Next slide. So in this particular slide, as part of our work, again, this is the same area where neighbors used to see abandoned trucks and cars and debris from the construction enterprise that was abandoned and left orphaned on site. We were able, through our work, to clear the site, to create a stormwater management plan and to put a new greenhouse in that space. Next slide. And again, in addition to the work that was interior to the site, community members were very adamant about adding more trees and green space in the facility. So we softened the site, brought students in to work on bringing color and texture to the facilities itself, to take away the gray Pantones and to bring in color, to add trees and orchards on the facility. Now we have partnerships, the Philadelphia Orchard Project, Penn State, and others to bring in and to manage and measure green space. Next slide. And so the green infrastructural work for us essentially helps to mitigate some of the aspects of heat island effect in the community, stormwater management issues, and air quality. The previous slide was showing the interior of the supermarket, and part of our work enable us to fell that building and to take away those hazardous materials. Next slide. So again, the modeling for the initial project, the Brownsfields project, was a sort of a Brownsfields to Greenfield strategy, a great deal of urban greening. The time doesn't quite permit, but we were able to take every aspect of our work and translate it into potential career technical education opportunities for students. We've educated over 50,000 students over the course of our time working at the center, and have created a number of a career trajectory for our students. The secondary grant that we're participating in is the EPA Environmental Education Grant, and I'll just keep this relatively simple. It's really designed to create opportunities to inform the community, to help the community understand areas in which they can be more informed around environmental education, about climate, environmental justice. We focus on 5 areas: improved air quality, where we give community members air monitors so that they can understand air quality interior to where they live. We deal with repurposing vacant lots. We address the issues of lead contamination. We have a great deal of concern around lead contamination in this respective community. Yeah, so the fundamental point being is that EPA's contribution to our work by way of grant funding enabled us to engage an entire community. It's a small, hyper small scale. You know, I was listening to our colleagues who had these really big projects. These are hyper small projects, but the communities are immensely grateful. It transforms the nature and lifestyle we directly touch at least 300 to 400 people just by way of the neighbors who circumambulate our site. But there are thousands of, if not hundreds of thousands of people who have benefited from the educational opportunities that grew out of the work that we were doing with the EPA. So we appreciate our partnership with the EPA and that the opportunities that grow out of their fiscal support. So let me just, I know you're running short on time, so I think it's best to just leave it right there. And if there's any questions, we can talk about it in the Q&A session.